Cheers.
Cheers, everyone. Welcome
Yeah.
to What You Know Should Know podcast. This week, first ever interview. Two special guests. If you guys want to introduce yourselves, maybe give a tiny bit of background before we get started.
Okay. Teresa, you want to go first?
You're our leader, so you can go ahead first.
Oh, okay. So we're going to defer to that. All right. Well, my name is Brian Clary. I am the founder / co-founder with Teresa of SRI Spectral Research and Investigations in Huntington, West Virginia. I have done paranormal research and investigations since I was about 15 years old. So almost 20 years. Well, a little bit over 20 years now at this point. We wanted to start a new organization to kind of do this because some of the ones that have been more established over the years have kind of defaulted. That's why Teresa and I kind of found ourselves, is because Teresa was part of a well-known and established group here in the region for several years before I think they just kind of as time went on, they kind of went their own separate ways.
Thank you. And
All right.
Teresa.
And I'm Teresa Racer. In addition to being a paranormal investigator, I also run the website Teresa's Haunted History of the Tri-State. And I've really been interested in this field like my whole life. I mean, some of the earliest books that I remember having as a kid were like ghost books. So when I was about 9, we moved into a house that like everybody thought was haunted. And so that's when I really started like researching things like, okay, what could be paranormal, what might not be paranormal. And from there it just took off. So I've been doing this. I'm 38 now, so over 20 years in the field.
That's awesome. So it seems like you guys both started at a super young age. Did you have any role models like that? Like, I know there are like the Warrens, but was there anybody that reached out to you, like when you were starting to do your investigation, anybody that you thought of as like, wow, this is the gold standard?
I was a big Hans Holzer fan when I was younger. His were some of the first kind of like collective works on the paranormal that I found. But being from West Virginia, Ruth Ann Music, she collected local folklore from West Virginia, had some awesome books, Coffin Hollow, the Telltale Lilac book. Those are the ones that I grew up reading. When I first started this, there wasn't a paranormal scene in West Virginia. I mean, there wasn't people doing this. So I had to, kind of look outside the box for role models.
Yeah, a lot of when I was growing up, the biggest group that was kind of getting established at the time, because I remember always watching television with my dad in the evenings, and one of the things that he was always go to was the original Ghost Hunters. Now, he also watched a lot of that Most Haunted that was on Travel Channel for many years.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Zach. What's his name now? I usually give him grief, Teresa, and I can't remember it. Bagans. So I watched him a lot growing up as well. I mean, when those shows came out, I mean, it was the early 2000s. So a lot of folks that are into the field today would have grown up like watching them on TV and just kind of getting the start through them. In the early years, especially when you had a lot more of the emphasis on like the science and less on the backgrounds of the individuals and the personalities of the individuals was also really big. As time went on, as television got kind of its little webs in there, it started to deteriorate quite a bit. So a lot of those guys like Jason Hawes, Grant, I can't remember Grant's last name, were kind of influences. A lot of the same folks that Teresa mentioned as part of her readings. Holzer was one I remember reading very early on. So those kind of are kind of where I've got my start as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned Ghost TV. Would you say that's an accurate depiction of what it's like today, or no?
I think for my part, and I'll let Teresa kind of jump in as well whenever she wants, one of the things that you've noticed as over the years as went on, there's been more emphasis on the television side of it, the entertainment side of it. These companies are like zero point zero and stuff like that. They know what they're doing. They've made a lot of these different television shows over the years, and they have kind of figured it out. And they've also figured out over the years, seeing mistakes that have been made or hearing comments that have been made by folks, is they always want more. And I think that was one of the things that kind of set out to me from an early state with the original Sci-Fi Channel incantation of Ghost Hunters, is that those guys seemed to be just as happy, and I could be wrong on this, it could have been television itself in its time, but they seemed almost as happy to not get anything or to be able to prove that whatever it was not the paranormal. Now, over time, as a lot of these television shows have kind of picked in, that has kind of went by the wayside. And now there is more emphasis on the chill factor, or whatever you want to call it. And Teresa?
Well, I mean, you got to keep in mind that these ghost hunting shows, even the early incantations, were not marketed for paranormal investigators.
Mhm.
They were marketed, for your regular person that kind of wanted a taste of it, kind of get their, a thrill, and have everything wrapped up in 22 to 44 minutes.
Mhm.
So there are parts of it that I would say, okay, that's pretty accurate. But not really.
Yeah.
There's so much more behind the scenes that they don't show you. I've worked actually on one pretty famous television show behind the scenes, and I won't mention what it was, but when I didn't want to be on camera, they just took all my research and brought in a historian that found it.
That sucks. So you were mentioning that like the earlier guys, they were super happy with like just getting nothing. And what I had read up on is that a lot of paranormal investigators, when they originally got into it, were skeptics. Have you guys noticed that as well?
Yeah.
I think I've become more skeptical over the years.
Yeah. Considering some of the things that I've experienced over the years, and I know Teresa's had similar experiences, some of the things that you would experience or be, I'm trying to think of the word to use. So when we meet with clients, we have met with clients over the past. I know I've done it over many years, but here, just like in recent years or recent times, we had an interview with a client that we were kind of skeptical to begin with. And then we get there, and it is exactly what you think, which is probably not something that is paranormal, but something that is far more human-based than anything else. You'll have also the opportunities that a lot of folks that I've known have gotten into it and become more of a believer for whatever reason. I think that's kind of a flawed logic, to be honest, because the whole object of this is to find as much scientific proof as possible. And we have to be cognizant of the fact that we operate in a very, scrutinized field. Most of the equipment we use is equipment that has been used solely for another purpose and been reanimated into something that could be paranormal, but we don't know with 100% certainty. We can only use by the best guesses and the best theories that are out there in the day, and hopefully 1 in 2 million might be something that said, oh, there was a little incremental jump up there. Problem is that a lot of the equipment and stuff like that is being used now on television for that extra boost of entertainment value, I think a lot of it is such flawed technology that it is almost unusable. But to the general watcher, the general person that is into paranormal just on a day here and there, it seems like good stuff. I am very much on the other end of the spectrum on that. So
that's pretty interesting. Can you kind of explain though, like what you mean by the equipment, like being repurposed from something else? Like I
pretend we don't know anything.
Yeah, I don't know much about the equipment type stuff. I've seen some things, but I couldn't tell you, like I could never guess what it's repurposed from.
I got you. So an EMF detector, just a basic one, a basic tool that comes out of every ghost hunter's pocket. The idea is that ghosts are electrical manifestations, and they can adjust or envelop the magnetic field in a surrounding area, and they can make adjustments to it. Sometimes spike in pressure or spike in that magnetic field might be a spirit trying to reach out to us or trying to manifest itself or something like that. But an EMF detector is just a piece of electrical equipment. It's something that's used to target lines and stuff like that in the walls, especially electrical lines. If you are in older houses, which the old story with the older houses is that older houses are typically more haunted. Well, that may be true in terms of that, but it also may be the fact that the house has not been updated in 50 or 60 years, and the wiring that is used in the wall has deteriorating insulation on it. So that wiring, even when you flip a switch on in an old house, if that wiring is deteriorated at all, you're going to get a pickup in the magnetic field. And what electricians use those EMF detectors for is to go around and find places that they can isolate in the line that are problematic. That way they can adjust them, or when they're doing a new line out, they know how to fix any negative issues that are in the house. And EMFs are known to be something that can affect people. You can be more sensitive and stuff like that. And then there comes the haunting extra element. That's not necessarily to say all situations are that, but a lot of your haunting situations, your paranormal situations, can be looked at as a lot of them are EMF related.
Okay.
Yeah, and to keep in mind, we can't prove that ghosts exist, let alone what they are, the physics behind them. So we can't create equipment to really, measure that. We've got to take what's already available that measures different changes, in our physical world, such as EMF detectors are the big ones. They'll take a regular EMF detector, slap a little plastic label on it that says ghost meter, and up the cost $20 to $30.
Yes.
But we use a lot of technology that wasn't necessarily meant for ghost hunting. We use DVR cameras, infrared cameras, digital voice recorders. All this stuff, wasn't, designed for ghost hunting, but we try to detect those, little subtle changes in the environment around us. And maybe if there's a change, we can link that to paranormal activity.
Yeah. Another piece of equipment that's really become popular in recent years is something called the spirit box. Spirit boxes, how they are functional, they are nothing more than a radio. That is it. They are a standard AM FM radio that you can get at Walmart for $15. And what it is when you mess with a little handheld radio, if you've ever went and hit the tuning button, you'll notice that it jumps between channels until it finds a signal that is steady enough to hold. What you are doing, or what the people that are doing that are using these spirit box or making spirit boxes and selling them on the internet, all they are doing is they are taking out that stopgap that is in a radio that allows it to detect a signal and stop there. They are deactivating that, so it runs in a loop, and it's running constantly at a very high speed. And if you're anywhere near a major metropolitan or even some smaller areas, you're going to pick up signals on occasion. So those things will run, and you'll pick up a big word. It'll be like, help. Well, that might be paranormal. I think it's kind of unlikely that it is, but what it could be is just simply the fact that signal, that AM FM signal at that time was coming in stronger than anything else on the spectrum. But then you'll notice it just continues to go on in the perpetual circle that is the spirit box. That is what that piece of equipment is. That is extremely popular in today's television-based ghost hunting. That is something that gives you answers. And it might be, I hate to say it like this, but I think in a lot of cases this is how it works. They get the answers they want out of it just by getting something to respond, even though there might not be anything there. It's more fitting to the public and to the general watcher to see at least something to pick up that otherwise could be a 44 minutes of solid boredom.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all it is.
Drama,
Yeah.
So this might be a silly question, but so I've heard the spirit box. I went to Zach Baggins Museum.
Mm-hmm.
So when it does the, is that just re-hitting the loop essentially?
Yeah, it's running through the cycle. Is
Oh,
all it is.
wow.
It's running through, and you'll get this distortions periodically, and
Yeah.
it's running through the stations, and then occasionally you'll just get that like pop in where the signal boosts up just enough to pop out, and then come back out. That is all that science is doing.
What other methods of communication do you guys use? I've heard of the light game, things like that. I don't know what you guys are using.
Go ahead, Teresa. You can answer this one. I feel like I've talked a lot.
We try to, be diverse. We try to use a different methods of communication. We do just, the classic EVP with the recorder, try to get electromagnetic voices. Those are voices that you can't hear with your own ears. They're either too high or too low on our spectrum. So we just, ask questions and answers, try to get, answers to come through the EVP. Usually, unless you're doing like the Estes method where you're listening to it in real time, we have to just go back and check that later. We do have some of the fun toys though. We have spirit boxes. We have an obelisk, which is very similar. It's more of a device that takes electromagnetic fields and converts them into words that are in a dictionary. And what we kind of do to like combat, the issues of, well, okay, is it really communication? We keep a log of all the words that come out of it and what, we're saying beforehand. That way we can't have that, confirmation bias that, oh my gosh, it answered our question when it said 30 other words that, or just have nothing to do with anything. It's I don't know how to explain it. We want to have that data, but we really, really want to analyze that data. And, it's really fun and awesome when, the spirit box seems to answer a question for us. But then, like the skeptical scientific side really has to go back and be like, okay, is that help just from a, an acid commercial, or is it really, a spirit asking us for help?
What would you say was like your most uplifting communication with something?
Oh, Brian, you should probably take that one.
Trying to think if there was. One of our favorite sites is in Central West Virginia, up in Sutton, and it's the William Edgar Heyman House that was built back in the early 1890s, I believe, by a wealthy entrepreneur in the region. And he was, according to what we know, not necessarily the nicest to his wives, to put it mildly. We know that he had some issues with women of a lot of different types, but I think we've had some issues. I think Teresa and I, when we did one of our EMF session or EMF EVP sessions, and then we also had the Ovilus running, which is the thing she was talking about, has a dictionary mode in it. We seem to get some answers that seem to match up with something with one of his former wives. I believe her name was Emma, where it seemed like it wasn't like what I would call like a call for help or anything like that, or anything that seemed overly negative. And in and of itself, when you know the history of the family and dealing with the issues that were going on there, it would be even a big deal to get nothing bad from what I would equate to a domestic abuse situation, as it would be to get your best, trying to think of the best ceremonial or most celebrative message. Generally the things that we get, and it's hard because we have been so ingrained in the new age of ghost hunting where there is so much emphasis put on getting the reaction out of the constituency that we expect to hear these, oh, I'm okay, don't worry about me kind of things. And I think that's in general just by the nature of what we do. I can't speak to some groups, but I can speak to us. it would be very difficult to do one of these sessions and get a ton of responses that would tend to go that way. A lot of the things we get tend to be kind of cryptid or cryptid. So it's kind of like we kind of have to make our best inferences on it. And that's the hardest part of it.
Mm-hmm. So,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to ask about kind of what you guys were talking about earlier is really trying to make sure that what you're getting is like a confirmed anomaly compared to, the radio frequency.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of times what we do, and then Teresa can belly in on this as well, what we try to do is run different pieces of equipment at the same time. One of the things we try to do most often is have all of our members or anybody that's with us holding at least one piece of equipment. That way we can verify across different pieces of equipment that we're not, like, if we have two different EMF detectors, we can figure out if one of them's faulty or not by if they're both going off at the same time. So if we test it to a source like an electrical box or whatever, and both of them are going off, we can be reasonably assured that those pieces of equipment are synced up and they are both working properly. Sometimes we'll do an EMF detector and a K2 meter, which is kind of similar, runs similarly, not quite the same, but just a little bit of a manipulation there that allows it to kind of function in the same element. We'll try to do that, or we'll try to do something like physically just doing the magnetic field check, but also having a digital recorder going, or a camera going, or a what am I thinking of, Teresa? We did this just the other day, and I can't remember. Oh shoot!
Everything we do, we make sure that we're being videoed, just for another layer of evidence integrity.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, like you said, we always try to double up. Too much data is better than not enough data. So, anytime, if we get a hit on one piece of equipment, that's awesome. If we can hit it on two pieces of equipment at the same time, that's even better. And even still, we can't say for sure, okay, that's a ghost. It's something that I'm really proud of, our group is we take it a different, even a deeper layer. We really, really hit the historical research hard. A lot of times if you see these like really big name, places that everybody knows is haunted, and they'll tell you these stories about, oh, this little girl named so and so. Well, okay, where did that name come from? Well, it came through the spirit box. Well, okay, is there any historical documentation that this little girl existed? Not that we found. So we spend hours upon hours beforehand getting as much historical documentation, newspaper articles, genealogical records, anything we can find. And then any name that might come up on our boxes or, through that, then we just really, really try to, can we connect that with the location?
Gotcha. So you guys you went back to the old hospital on College Hill very
Correct.
recently. So when you do a revisit, what is your goal?
Well, I know for my part this time around, I felt like we got in there. That's the first time we had ever been to that location back in July. And I don't think Teresa and I really knew what to expect. We had heard stories from it, but we had never been there. So when we get in the building, what was it?
This is a really new location too.
Yeah.
They just opened last February, so not a whole lot of people have been in there yet.
Mm-hmm. So when we get in there for the first time, and things seem to start happening relatively quickly, you kind of get caught off guard and you get pseudo excited, whatever you want to call with it. And then you start kind of, what I thought happened with us is we lost kind of a rhythm getting going, where we would normally do things a specific way. But we got so excited part of it is the fact that this is a paid location. You go there. You don't want to go there, obviously, if you pay a decent amount for a ticket to go to one of these places and nothing happened. That would suck. But then by having that stuff actually start to happen, it got a lot of us kind of motivated and excited. but some things that we would normally do to kind of say, hey, look, this may be paranormal, this may not be. Then at that point, we kind of lose that element. And that's one thing that I wanted to gain this time going back, is going through and doing more of a general sweep of the building, getting an idea of what is in there, which one of the things about the building is there's very little electricity and stuff in there, but it's good to go through and check and make sure there's no kind of equipment that is on or hidden or anything like that. We've had places do that in the past, where you will go into places expecting this haunted location. Well, they give you a haunted location, but it's a manipulated haunt. It's something that there are places that will hide equipment and stuff like that to give you those Halloween haunted house scares to make sure you come back, even though it's not paranormal. So one of the things I wanted to do was just make sure we were doing our best to go through and find legitimate, or what we can most closely call legitimate, because like I said, we operate in a very scrutinized and very niche scientific field.
And to get back to the original question, yeah, that's what you want to do. You want to hit a location multiple times. When you go back, you want to, any evidence you might have gathered from the first time, you want to see if you can disprove it or recreate it. You want to hit areas that maybe weren't hot spots beforehand, but then you found out. Like this last trip to the old hospital in College Hill, we had our cameras set up in certain locations because we know that's where we saw activity happen last time. So we wanted to try to capture that. Well, we found out that when we had that camera set up in a certain location, things kind of moved to another location. So I'm sure we'll be there again. And next time, probably set up cameras facing that way to try to, really hit the hot spots that might not necessarily have been hot spots before.
So is there like an ideal time to go? And then also kind of on top of that, where's the main sort of areas you're going to? Because you mentioned that this was a newer location that was paid for, correct? Like someone else hosted it, or are there more like, I don't know how to say, like residential calls or something where somebody wants you to check out something in their personal home?
It's kind of hard right now in the years of COVID to really get into residential facilities. I mean, they used to be more common. We have done one here in the recent months, but we haven't done a whole lot of those. What I mean by those paid locations are like the places that are advertising you to come in as either part of the public or as a private group to do an overnight investigation, and they are charging you an admission for maintenance of the facility and whatever else you want to call on it. And a lot of those are out there right now, and some of them are getting to a point where it is becoming paranormal tourism. Here in West Virginia, there are a couple major ones that are up. And I think in your all's area, like Eastern State is a big one up in that region. And that's the one that for many years, every ghost hunter type folk in the Northeast wanted to make it to Eastern State Penitentiary, the same as they want to get at Mansfield, Ohio, or anywhere like that. We've got a couple here in West Virginia that do a lot of that same thing, where it is a paid admission to come in. You can either work as public or private, come in at the day that they select or you select and they approve, and then you have the building to yourself for that evening or whatever. So there's a lot of those going on. We also have some smaller kind of pay-to-play kind of things. A lot of them are coming up. I mentioned the Haymond House. We have been there a couple times, and that is kind of operating as essentially a haunted Airbnb, where you can go in, and the lady that owns it's the nicest thing on the planet. She has beds. She has a full kitchen in there. You can entertain yourselves. And in the evening, when it's time to go, it's time to go. And you can just go through the building. Then at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is an absolute paradise, or 4 o'clock in the morning for paradise for ghost hunter, is being able to lay down in a bed and sleep for a couple hours before you have to drive home and break equipment down and all that before you go back. So there's some of those coming around. There are some of these that are smaller pay to play that are locations that are like a business, and they are having you come in, and you're getting the agreement to come in for the night and kind of check out the reports that they have in their business. So those things are coming up as well. There's kind of a blend. Now, there are residential cases, and sometimes we will get like notices from some of these residentials, but you really have to be careful with the residential cases, because you can be walking into a whole number of issues that may or may not be paranormal. So a lot of times we have to do something that is more along the lines of a pre-interview, where we talk to folks and kind of figure out what's going on. Is this something that is possibly paranormal? And also we have to make sure, which we had issues with in the past, we have to be able to investigate. Because one residential case I remember quite clearly, we really weren't able to investigate, because what we seemed to run into was something that was us more taking care of the child on the location while the parents did their own thing. So we have to be very careful about taking residential cases, because in general, they can go a couple different ways.
And I'm just now getting back into doing residentials. My old group, we had to stop doing them completely several years ago, because we're based out of Huntington. And I don't know how much y'all know about Huntington, but it got to the point where, with the drug use and stuff, it was too dangerous. It was too much of a risk to bring our group into a private residence, even if we screened them, as much as we could screen a person. I mean, we were on one investigation, and I mean, these people were the nicest people ever. They were fine, but they went out to get dinner while we investigated, and we had one of their clients stop by.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
you mentioned like 3-4 a.m. is a great time for paranormal hunters. Is that like the ideal time?
Isn't 3 a.m. like the devil's haunting hour or something like that?
That was the old legend, is that's the haunting hour, the devil's hour, what have you. I don't know what it is. A lot of locations you go to, I don't know if it could be something to do with the magnetic field of the planet and the sun's position in the middle of the night and all that jive. I don't know with 100% certainty, obviously, but it seems like that 2 to 4 window, especially right around 3, is very active for a lot of locations that we go to. I mean, we've been to 2 fairly recently, and both of them were pretty active at about 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, it makes no sense. I don't know if the sun position thing is that. It could be, but it's interesting, because a lot of paranormal investigators will mention that kind of time frame as the time. It also could be that we're all getting loopy and tired at that point. I don't know, but that's possible.
I mean, we laugh at it because it's like, oh, the devil's hour. What, does he take in, time zones and daylight savings and all that? But yeah, it really is, that goes back to, you'd rather have more data than not enough. So, okay, what times are we having stuff? And it does seem to be that 2 to 4 window. And, it could be another possibility. We've been on the site for several hours at that point. Maybe we're getting kind of used to like the subtle little background of the building. If there is something there, maybe they're getting used to us. And so, we've got that kind of awkward phase out of the way. And, we can really kind of tell like what's normal for the building, what's not as normal. And they're used to us. They're comfortable with us at that point.
I want a hot take from you guys right now on 2 locations. First location is Lake Shawnee Amusement Park.
Okay.
And the second one is Harper's Ferry.
Okay, well, I will tell you that we have not had any luck getting into Lake Shawnee yet. I don't know. Did HPR ever get in there, Teresa?
We never did a formal investigation there, but we've driven past there. So I've got to ask y'all, have you been there in person?
Mm-mm.
Okay, I'll save my comments for after Brian's done.
Yeah. I don't know about it. I mean, the hardest part of it is now, and here in West Virginia, you all have it a little bit up in Pennsylvania and stuff as well, but there's so much emphasis on the tourism aspect that
Yep.
These folks are trying to get as much as they possibly can. And when you look at like a place like Lake Shawnee, that's down in Greenbrier County, which is a very, except for one person in the county, a very poor county, these folks are going to try and market whatever they can. And it just happens to be an old, broken down amusement park that hasn't run in something like 40 years or something like that. I can't remember even when it shut.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've never been there, like I said, so I don't want to cast dispersions on them because until I get there, I can't say for sure. I would be interested in checking it out, but I also know it is very difficult to get a hold of. We've had a lot of trouble trying to get a hold of anybody that works there to try to do something there. It's a little distance from us, so we have to be able to coordinate it. And then you mentioned the other one was Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry, just given the history of the area, it would be hard to believe that there isn't some type of energy left behind. Now, what that is, I don't know. But I mean, when you think of that date in 1859 when John Brown raided that town and the entire town coming out with their rifles and shooting at him and his men being trapped in that firehouse with nothing else to do, that would be pretty darn scary. And that's going to kind of leave a lot of anger and hostility around. And then on the flip side, the people of Harper's Ferry in general were so tied to Virginia at that time that the idea of this guy coming up and coming over from Kansas, this abolitionist coming over here and raising rural hell on the border, would have been very anger inducing for the local population, which is why they came out with their rifles in the first place to chase him out. So there's going to be a lot of anger. There's going to be a lot of emotion. There's going to be a lot of hostility. And then that place saw the entirety of the Civil War. Then you had the floods and things like that that have damaged that town or done tremendous things to over the years. That's a national park. They don't touch it very much. They redo a building here and there. Sometimes that seems like that can stir things up a little bit. But that's a part of their tourism outreach. When I don't blame them if you're trying to get anybody to these locations. I mean, it's perfectly to say, okay, it's haunted. Now, whether or not it is, I don't know. We can only make our best guesses on it. But where both of those are, there is such an emphasis on the paratourism that is starting up. And it's now getting to a position where I'm starting to see it like really take hold all over the United States. And here in West Virginia is no different because we have a lot of little unique locations like that could be haunted, and circumstances would dictate that they could be, if that is true or false, whether or not that is actually a thing. And these folks are just kind of pushing it out, the message to say, hey, look, you all, this stuff is becoming hot now. Come check us out. I mean, it's economics at this point.
Okay, so back to Lake Shawnee.
She's got something.
I've never investigated there. I've never had any interaction with the owner. But when you see it like on TV or on the internet, you're like, oh my God, there is this like Scooby-Doo level haunted amusement park right here in West Virginia. And so like you've got to like flock to it. So several years ago, we had to be down that way for a business meeting. And we decided, drive by. We didn't want to trespass, so we just drove by. And we drove by, we're like, where's it at? And suddenly we see it. But you could barely see it because it was summer and there was lots of foliage out. But like the two amusement rides that are left, there's a swing ride and then there's a Ferris wheel. You could fit this Ferris wheel in my living room. I mean, it is not like the big, I mean, it just looks like, some dad built some, really cool toys out for their kid out in, in the front yard, and now they're falling apart and being reclaimed by nature. So when you go to it, it's kind of disappointing to see at first because it's not the Scooby-Doo level haunted amusement park. It's, some broken down, rusted, metal and wood. It's so small, and it's right there by the road, so you can see it too if you look close enough. And it's not summertime. But for my website, I've researched this location,
Mhm.
and there is some legitimate dark history involved. There was a massacre of Native Americans to a white early English settlement there, where several children were brutally killed. But I don't understand why they just can't take that legitimate history. Also, there were like multiple drownings at the pool and the lake that used to be there. Um, so there's legitimate dark history there. But the story that everybody hears is the little girl seen on the swing who was killed when the swing bashed into a Coca-Cola truck that had pulled up to make a delivery. Nobody that I have ever talked to that has lived in the area remembers that. Hours and hours of microfiche and newspaper archive research, nothing. There is no documentation to say that that ever happened. So is it haunted? I don't know. I've never investigated there. I don't have any reason to believe that people who have seen things are not necessarily telling the truth, but the documentation doesn't match up some of the most popular stories, and that's disappointing. It's always great when we can find something that does like match up with the stories.
To
And
piggyback off that, Teresa, when you get a chance, tell them the story of when we went down to Beckley here recently and found the story of the little boy in the pool and how that can kind of change positions over time.
right, yeah. So we just recently did an investigation of a business located in Beckley, and the business was built directly atop the old pool of an old motel. Um, which this motel has some dark, dark history. I mean, as a hotel and even the land before then. But one of the stories that the owner had heard was that a boy snuck in the pool after hours and jumped off the diving board, hit his head, passed away, drowned after he hit his head. Um, I couldn't find any documentation to back that up. Now, just because there isn't any that I could find doesn't mean that that didn't necessarily happen. But what I did find was that the country club that's literally within walking distance, I mean, it's right over the hill from it, that happened there. um, there was
Oh.
a boy that, snuck in, same age as, what the owner had heard, hit his head. And fortunately, this boy did not pass away. So, we can't really say, okay, well, is the documentation just not available? Did they try to cover it up? Or did the person who told him the story get their facts mixed up?
Misremember. Yeah.
Yeah. And a similar thing happened with Old Hospital on College Hill. One of their main stories is this nurse who she was on her way to work, got into a car crash, was taken to her own ER and passed away. I couldn't find any documentation of that. What I did find documentation of was there was a nurse, and she had a daughter who was also a nurse, and she and her grandson dropped the daughter off at another medical facility where the daughter worked, and on their way back home, this woman crashed her car into the Tug River in this horrific, accident. Well, this old man jumped in, managed to save him. They got both of them to the hospital where the nurse worked. So that was her own ER that she was taken to. And her injuries were pretty horrific. And they were probably, career ending. But she lived another almost 50 years.
Wow.
So we don't know if maybe people remember, okay, yeah, this nurse was taken to her own ER after this horrific car crash. We never saw her again, because she couldn't work. She must have died. This must be, a ghost. Um, so I think it's fun to try to uncover these mysteries, but it's also super, super frustrating because, like, again, there just might not be documentation available at this point on that story. I can't prove or disprove it at this
Yeah.
point.
One of the hardest parts of it is, especially when a lot of folks have heard these stories for so long, and maybe they're the location owner or whatever, and it's actually become part of their identity, to kind of like show them that maybe we can't find evidence of that one, but we can find something similar that happened a couple 100 feet or a couple miles away. Sometimes that can go one of two ways. That can be like somebody becomes really hostile. No, that's the way I remember it. That's the way I was told it. that's the way it happened. Or you'll get on the other side, the flip side, the person's like, oh, okay, cool. Well, now that gives me a little bit of something to go by. So that's something we also kind of weigh too, because some of the folks that we've talked to and discussed with over the years don't necessarily like their story being adjusted.
I'm not surprised by that. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's especially like a business or something that might draw people there too. They could have picked the location because of that.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised, but that's definitely difficult.
Teresa, do you have any research stories that like stood out? Like any like super historic background of a place that you got really excited about or anything like that?
I'm kind of like I'm a ghost nerd anyway. So every investigation that I research for is like, oh yeah, this is awesome. This is so cool. And there's one though, and it was kind of morbid in a way. It was an investigation of a local. It was a privately owned business. It's fairly known, but he does not allow investigations now. It's a dentist office in Huntington. And we did hear these stories from the owner about, potential identities of, the ghosts that they thought were there. And when I started researching it, they were true. This is the point where they were, that the research actually did match up. And we were able to confirm, okay, well, yeah, this person died in the way that they said that they passed away. And, there were some like minor discrepancies, but the minor discrepancies kind of worked in our favor because they made more sense than what the original stories were. We had these different stories about the main ghost girl there. How did she die? And it was really weird because there was 3 newspaper articles mentioning her death. From like the morning and evening edition and then the next day. And all 3 had a different cause of death. So we're like, okay, were they just completely ignorant about how she died? One had that she drank, bad alcohol. This was during the days of Prohibition. One had that she fell down the stairs. And another one said that she died of I think it was like pneumonia or something. I don't know, something completely off the wall. So it's like, okay, did she get drunk and fall down the stairs? I mean, did she, how did she really die? And then pulling the death certificate was a 4th cause of death. So yeah, it's really interesting and I've learned so much about our local history just, from my work in paranormal investigation. I love it. It's it's my favorite part. I know a lot of people get into it because of like the gadgets are fun and that's, collecting evidence is really fun. I love to do the research behind it.
We're both history nerds. Like that's our thing. So that's where it kind of fits in for us.
Do you have any specials, Brian? Any favorites of yourself?
Favorite locations or
I mean anything really. I was thinking more of like history background that kind of led to something cool.
So one of the things that's always kind of fun is hitting the bigger locations. There's a couple of them here in West Virginia, like West Virginia Penitentiary, and in the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, which used to be the former Weston State Hospital for the mentally disabled or whatever. And what's interesting is some of the stories that go along with those places, like former workers and stuff like that have been there that can tell you the story. That's the thing that I find the most fascinating, is talking to the folks that have actually spent some physical time in there before it was a location and saying, here is what we remember happened. And then if we can find the stories that seem to match up with what their remembrances are or something that they have been told over the years, then we have a little bit more of a credit. The thing that I like the most, the same kind of historical aspect, is talking to the people that were there, the people that experienced it, looking back at any kind of sources that we can find, especially primary sources of that time, and seeing if we can locate any clues to whether or not these stories actually were true or not. Because one of the things you all know as well as I do is that with these legends, there's often some element of truth. It's just you have to be able to dig it out somewhere to figure out what is the closest thing to the truth that we can find. And when you are able to dig out those little bits and pieces of stories, like I think was Teresa, if memory serves me, at the West Virginia Pen, Charles Manson, the story was for years that he spent some time there. But what actually came out was that it was his mother, wasn't it?
Yeah, his mother was there for a brief time, and then he wrote the letter to the warden saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
I would love to be transferred here," and they're like, "Hell no."
And that's one of their favorite stories to tell up there is they have the letter out on display in this front museum type room that he wrote to the museum, or not the museum, the prison director, and say, "Hey, look, get me here." That's the stuff that's fun about it. Is like, oh, these little stories aren't actually stories. They did happen. Maybe they've been twisted or something like that over the time, but it's kind of like putting the clues back together. That's the fun part. It's like saying, okay, well, this happened. This is a little bit different. Let's me try to kind of flex it back and then see if we can get closer to like a ground zero of the story itself. That's so fun.
So it's more than just a paranormal investigation. You're also investigating the history and sort of making things connect.
I think if you are any reputable group, one of the things you have to be able to do is to look at the historical aspect of the site, see if you can prove or disprove any of it, because ultimately a lot of these cases, I'd say a legitimate probably 70%, are a lot of times they are manipulations of stories from homeowners, business owners, or something like that, because there's some element of gain there. But if you can find those stories that match up, that is the interesting part. And I think if you're a reputable group, one of the things you have to do is be able to look up the history and see if any of that stuff makes sense and to at least inform the property owner. Now, whether or not they take that evidence that you provide to them as, okay, cool, now I know a little bit more, or what are you telling me? I know that's not true. Then that's another side of it as well. But that's one of the kind of the gambles we have to take. And I think that's one of the things that's necessary with doing this is being able to make sure that your stories and you are providing the best overall research on the location to tell these folks, hey, this is what we know. Does that mean it is 100% certain? Absolutely not. But this is what we know. This is what we can prove to you right now, and go take it as you will.
And we do provide that caveat. We make sure that they know that this isn't the end of all ends.
No.
Records disappear all the time. Even primary sources can be wrong. I've got a typo on my birth certificate, so that might cause some issues one day if I'm a ghost someday. But yeah, I mean, we want to inform the owner, give them our documentation. We make sure that all the owners have the documentation that we can provide for them, and just go from there. This is a never ending project for me. I've worked on cases years ago, and then I'll come across something that adds to the story, and I'll be like, oh, so research it never ends. All these locations to me are open cases.
That's awesome. So I've got a little more of ghost kind of question. So when you experience like your hauntings, are they mostly residual? And also, could you explain what residual hauntings are to the guests or the people that are watching or listening?
Do you want to take this, Teresa? Do you want me to? I don't care.
Yeah, I can start, and then you can fill in if I miss anything. So a residual in the basic terms is like a videotape replaying itself over and over again. Somehow conditions were correct in the world that it was able to record an image, a sound, sometimes both, of something that had happened in the past.
One of the ones we get a lot of is like the environmental factors. Like certain types of rock are more susceptible to storing any kind of electrical energy. Same thing with like rivers and water and stuff like that. There's a theory that hauntings are more common around a water source because that is fueling it. Don't know, but that's something that I think Teresa, she was right there around that area, I just figured I'd jump in on that.
So these types of hauntings are not going to be ones that will interact with you. They don't seem to have any intelligence. They're literally just a recording on the environment. And for years and years and years, like, that was the go-to, because there's so many different explanations what causes a residual haunting. You can get really deep into physics with string theory, or you can just do the quartz. If the area has a lot of quartz or limestone or certain minerals in the earth, that can somehow cause this imprint. So for a lot of years, most people, I don't want to even say assumed, but it was like, yeah, that was the majority of hauntings, were these residual hauntings. Um, and I don't know if it's just the crazy times that we're in lately, but maybe Brian can help me on this. Does this not seem like that most of the stuff that we've dealt with lately is not residual?
Yeah, we seem to be running into a lot of situations here recently where there seems to be some level of interaction. Now, those can vary from thing to thing, whether it be a simple little blip on the K2 meter, which we have to take with a grain of salt because so many little factors can influence that, and also the piece of equipment itself, because it's a bipolar or one level machine, it can be thrown off balance very easily. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. But what we were running into, a lot of the things that we have come into here in the past, I'd say years since we really kind of got going, we are running into quite a few things that are more, they seem to be able to respond to you in one way or another, whether it's to show just a brief image of themselves, whether it's to like get inside of your head and seemingly be able to manipulate something. But that's one of those things that, like, can I take it as evidence or not? I don't know, but it's an experience. And that's a lot of what we do, is trying to get as much evidence out of the limited experiences we do have. But we run into a lot of things here recently that seem to be able to manipulate or do or interact with you more commonly. I don't know what it is, but that does seem to be accurate.
Are they friendly or malevolent?
Well, if you're talking about residual, I mean, they're nothing. There's
I
no.
meant the intelligent ones, because I feel like the intelligent ones can interact.
Luckily, so far, I have never ran into anything that I would call truly malevolent or evil. Now, if we're going on the assumption that a ghost is a spirit of a living person that has passed on, that's just one theory. There's plenty of them out there, but that seems to be like a pretty widespread theory of what a ghost is. Just like people, there are nice, kind people. There are people that are complete a-holes. And there are people that, when they're confused or hurt or upset, act out in certain ways. And, we've definitely experienced things that I wouldn't necessarily call happy, positive, happy-go-lucky ghost. But I've been doing this for over 20 years. I have never felt threatened or, like I've dealt with something that was like straight up demonic or anything like that.
Yeah, one of the things we did here recently, there seemed to be something on location that wasn't what I would say was either human, but I wouldn't say it was like demonic either. It just looked like some kind of a leftover from history, from some animalistic thing over many, many, many years ago or what have you. But it was more just unsettling. I don't think it was necessarily that it is. I've never really ran into anything that really threatens me. I've ran into things that do seem to be able to manipulate like how you feel and what you experience. I've never had anything like straight demonic, but we had the thing in Beckley here very recently that it seemed generally curious, maybe would be the word, Teresa, that was just kind of odd. I mean, when you start hearing things that, if you all picture yourselves right now, think of like a lizard walking on the wall and hearing footsteps coming from the side of the wall that you cannot explain because it is a vertical wall. That's very different. and that's something that is not necessarily scary, but it's almost like a, what the hell is this? I really would be interested to know what is doing that, because that is probably not what I would call human.
And that's not typically the norm of like
No.
most ghost investigations and stuff. That whole case was something that a lot of it was really off the wall, kind of, what are we dealing with?
Yes.
And I think a lot of it was because that whole area was so saturated with violence and tragedy for so many years that energy was kind of so strong that it literally manifested into some kind of sludge that we were able to pick up on.
So do you guys have any crazy stories? I know you had mentioned Avnik, if I'm not mistaken.
Teresa, I'll let you take this one because I remember it.
So yeah, it was at the same location. We went into this investigation. It was at an antique store. Awesome owner, awesome location. It was the site of this old motel on this, super horrible dark background. And so we go into this knowing that, okay, we've got the elements of the location itself, the land, plus anything that might be attached to all of these antiques that are in here. And these antiques, so many of them were, war relics, police auction stuff. So even, the stuff inside had a dark history. So we were kind of prepared from our pre-interview, like, okay, we've got some opposing forces here. We've got the land itself. We've got the stuff that's inside this location. We had no idea that we'd be dealing with a Slavic demon cat. Yeah, so the owner, gave us his background and everything. And this didn't come up in our initial interview.
He said nothing about it.
And I was, with some of the ladies out in the motel area. And I come in and one of our members kind of pulls me aside and he's like, "Oh my gosh, Teresa, we saw this little black demon thing." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
I'll tell you exactly what it was, and then I'll let her continue it. So I was in the back room with the owner, and the owner told us when all else fails in the location to always check the mirrors. Idea that these things can manipulate the mirrors or manifest themselves in mirrors for you to see when you may not necessarily be able to see them otherwise. Okay. So he puts me in front of this old, it's like a reproduction type bar mirror, but it was like one of the Victrola ones with the dog and stuff from many years ago. And he puts me in front of it and he tells me, he's like, "Just wait here." And sure enough, I'm looking at the left side of the mirror. And I start seeing like a movement out of the back corner of my eye. And I had two of our guys that were standing over here behind us. And they were kind of checking out. There were some old antiques and then like an antique couch and then some old clothes on clothes racks. And the clothes racks were right behind them. And as I look, I start seeing just a little bit of a shade of like a movement. And I turn my attention away from the left to the right just long enough to see what looks like a cat monkey thing. I don't know how big. It was only maybe 18 inches tall from what I could tell. It was standing behind one of my members on the clothes rack. And I turned around and this thing like jumps down and runs. And you could see physically where it ran to because there were several big Chinette cabinets back there. And they all have that like area underneath where it's dark and can hide. And it looks like the thing runs underneath there. I go and check where I saw it run and it's not in there. Through the evening, we had numerous times where this thing came out. Again, later on, apparently the owner told me that I freaked the thing out because apparently he has a complete interaction with this thing where he feeds it care. No, just wait. Well, I'll let Teresa hit a lot of this because she is better storyteller on this part than I am. But again, later in the evening, he said that I upset it, that I freaked it out, that I got so excited and the fact that I saw this thing. So he tells me, he's like, "Go out here and I want you to calm down." Okay, I'll do it. We went and did something else. And he said, now you want to go try this again? And he takes me back to this back room. And we are back there just taking some of our equipment through our K2 and EMF meters. And we're checking different things back there. And I turn around for a moment to face the other wall, turn back around to address one of my guys that is over in the doorway where the owner has this little white lab pup that he apparently loves. The Ovnik apparently loves his dog.
Mm-hmm.
Turn around just long enough, and behind one of our members, this little cat thing was once again standing on a stack of 45 records on a cabinet, looking at my guy like kind of curious or whatever. And then it's like as moment or two after you get a lock on it and you see it, it bolts and hides. And we saw it throughout the night. Teresa, I'll let you.
Okay, so like I said, I was outside in another separate building when all this was going on. And so I come in, they tell me what had happened. I'm like, well, I want to see the little cat monkey thing too. I went into the room where they had seen him by myself and sat on the empty couch for a while. And I'm sitting there and nothing's happening. And at one point I kind of feel like maybe something had jumped up on the couch behind me, but it was so light that I couldn't really say if it was anything. And I'm getting kind of depressed because I want to see it too. Like all these other people saw it, I want to see it. So I asked out loud, I was like, if you're in here, may I please see you? And then a little bit more time goes by, and I kind of glance over my shoulder, and I'm not even sure if it was the same coat rack. I'm sure it was because there's only like 2 or 3 of them in there. I saw what looked like either a little cat or a little monkey, like completely black, but I could see its like, kind of like tail coming down, and pointy ears. And I was like, okay, I'm not seeing what I'm seeing. And it just kind of like dissipated. And about that time, the owner comes in and he's like, have you had any luck seeing it? And I'm like, well, I think I may have seen it, but I'm not 100% sure. And he's like, well, it's right here in this back room if you want to see it. And I'm like, bullshit. I mean,
Nice.
so I'm going back there and he's like, can you see it? It's right there. And in the storage tote that had some stuff, some merchandise that was getting ready to be priced, I swear to God, it looked like I have a black cat named Ichabod. And it looked just like Ichabod was hiding in this tote. And, you could see the mouth. You could see its little white fangs sticking out. You could see its green eyes that blinked at one point. And I'm in shock. Like I'm staring at this thing and I don't want to get too close because I'm afraid I'll like scare it off. And he's like, it's right there. He's like, do you see it? I'm like, I think I don't know. I don't know if I see it. And I was having like this real like personal struggle. I mean, part of me is like, oh my God, I have been given this great opportunity to see this creature. And another part, like the logical side is like, that cannot be, what I think
He
it
has
is.
to have a black cat hidden in here.
Yeah.
That was my initial thought, is there has to be a black cat in this place. There is no cat in that place. We looked, canvassed the whole place, cat boxes and stuff like that. There was nothing like that. So
he kept this a secret from you guys going into it? Like he didn't mention it at all?
no, he didn't even think to mention. He told me after the fact, he said, look, dude, if I'd have known that you were interested in this, I'd have told you about more of it. He said, but I just thought to mention that it is here. He equates it to something. His family history dates back over to like Croatia, Slovenia, Slovakia, somewhere like that. And his family came over as immigrants to the coal mines. And they said that it followed his family over from that region. And it was like a family. They're equated one of 2 ways. They can either be malevolent or benevolent, depending on the situation. They're more malevolent when you don't take care of them and don't provide them sustenance and keep them up. The old story from Slovenia, I think it is that if you don't appease the animal, it will burn your house or barn down. So the family apparently has taken care of this thing for many years. And he said it passed on to him. And he said I'd asked him about it after the fact. I was like, when was the first time you ever experienced it? He said, well, when I was about 4 or 5, when I started becoming aware. He said, the thing has just always been there. It's nothing that I've really paid that much attention. It was just a story that went on in the family. and he was talking about it, and he did legitimately. It's just like he's like, yeah, I'll tell you all about it now. He just didn't say anything about it beforehand, so that was completely different when we got in there, and that was something that we were not expecting. And then you see that as compared to what you would traditionally think is like your ghost hunting evidence that you would expect to see.
So did he go into detail at all? Like I'm just curious what's involved in appealing to it and taking care of it.
I don't know what all he told you, Teresa, but he told me the thing loves pancakes, and I'll let Teresa take it.
Yeah. Stories.
I think I know where it comes from, but
yeah. The original stories was these were like, I don't want to say demon, but that's how a lot of literature called it. They called it like a demon or an elemental or a nature spirit, and it would attach itself to a family. And these particular ones, the Ovniks, were known to haunt barns or granaries, and so you had to make an offering to it, or it would burn your barn down or eat all of your grain. So there was two things that it really, really liked as its offerings. One were roosters, and the other was, I can't remember what the name of it is. It was in Russian.
Blini?
Yeah, but it was
or something like that. Yeah,
it's a Russian pancake basically. So,
it's a
that's what
Slavic legend.
you offer up to it to appease it. And it's considered, if you actually see one of these, especially on New Year's Eve, that it's good luck. And since several of us saw it, hopefully that's good luck for SRI's future. But that's not the last interaction we had with this little thing that night. At one point, I was sitting alone in that room, and Brian was in the doorway to the office area, and he said something and made this noise like mm-hmm, and it was like it mimicked it like perfectly. Like
it was like right behind me, and it was like my same voice but magnified. And I was like, wait a minute, does he have like some kind of like a stereo back here that's recording audio? I checked my pockets to make sure I didn't have like a piece of digital voice recorder or anything going, and I didn't have anything, and it sounded just like me, but it came through. It had to be two times louder than my traditional like voice that I use. It was like, and I turned around and I looked at Teresa. I was like, "Did you just hear that?" We both responded at the same time. I don't know.
And then we found out through later research that the Ovnik is known to mimic. It will mimic like a dog's bark. That's the big thing that it will mimic, but it normally doesn't mimic human voices. So maybe it was something else. We kind of feel like it was the Ovnik. But we weren't done with it that night. We had pretty much all of us sitting in that back room, and we were, listening to one of our ghost boxes, and it was answering some questions and stuff. And the owner and one of his friends, who was a psychic, were over, and they were asking it some questions. And it seemed to be that whatever spirits may have been there, they were kind of intimidated by this little creature. This thing was very protective of, I think, the owner and of the store, and so it makes sense that they might be intimidated by this otherworldly thing that we can't really explain. But at one point, they kept saying the word salt. Salt kept coming over and over and over again for some reason. And so when they asked it, well, do you want us to leave salt out for the Ovnik? Like, it was a resounding, like, yes. So we had one of our members take a little bit of salt, put it in the corner where the little Ovnik hangs out. And I swear, we heard this little, and the dog was gone at this point, so it wasn't, the dog or anything. We heard this cute little, like, delightful squeak, like something like it was real happy and made a squeak sound, and we're like, well, I guess he liked his salt.
Wow,
it was
so
weird.
wild.
That's so cool.
And then at the end of the night, when we were getting ready to pack up our equipment, we started getting together, I think, our stuff around 6-ish, Teresa.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to go lights on in the facility. And I went to the back room where he says is the primary domain of this thing, and flipped on the light. And I'll swear to you all, just for just a moment or two, it sounded like I heard two little footsteps up in the roof going pat, 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 pat. as I turned the light on, like it was trying to get away in the light. It didn't want to be seen. One of the weirder experiences in doing this in 20 odd years is seeing that little cat monkey thing. So I got to give Travis kudos for that down at Deep End Antiques in Beckley, because he really hit us with a new one there.
Yeah, I mean, as a skeptic, like I'm still like internally processing this whole thing, and like I don't know. That was a game changer for me.
I can't imagine that. That's crazy.
We couldn't either beforehand. That's a new one for me. I consider myself a pretty good skeptic, but also like there's a point like, what? Like, did I legit just see that? Because I know I did, but I still can't believe it.
Yeah, that's such an awesome find. So speaking of like relics and things like that, do you find that those are more of the things that are like haunted, or do you think it's more places, or is it a mix?
Well, once again, and Teresa can kind of add in on this as well, it would be hard pressed for us to prove one way or another. I would be willing to suspect that if my theories and the general theories are right, that energies can be directed on whatever the person or whatever felt was valuable to it at the time. So if it was a little girl's doll and a little girl got sick and that doll was the most important thing in the world, it would kind of make sense that that might be the thing. Whereas maybe this old man who had spent 70 years in the same house and built it with his own two hands and stuff like that, and had lived there for so long, and that was his identity as much as him, that would make sense to kind of be like, that is an important thing to him. Maybe that is an imprint of him on that environment or whatever. So, I mean, I think it can be varied depending on the circumstance. I tend to believe the locations more personally, but I'm not to discredit the fact that certain objects could be that important to something that they choose to stay behind with it. I can't discredit that because it does seem to make sense. It's just the burden of proof there.
And I agree. I mean, it does really tend to be more tied to the location. Occasionally, we'll come across a case where the activity seems more tied to the person themselves, and wherever that person goes, they're like a battery that's going to jumpstart, whatever may be latent in a location. As for objects, personally, like over the years that I've been doing this, it's been fairly rare that we've had an actual object that could be legitimately, well, I don't even want to say legitimately because it can't be proven, but like, believably tied to a haunting. I think with objects, what more of you're getting with is, like Brian said, like an imprint. Maybe that person isn't necessarily attached themselves to the object, but they've imprinted their energy on it to the point where if you pick that object up, you can feel that energy coming off of it. You can pick up, details of the story behind that object.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the questions that we struggle with every day as investigators and researchers, and trying to figure out for ourselves.
So would you like kind of building off of that a little bit, like any type of movie object? Like I feel like situations like Annabelle the doll is so popular. Do you blindly believe anything like that, or is everything skeptical then for you guys until you experience it?
I'll let you take it first, Teresa.
I try not to blindly believe anything. I mean, I know that there are things out there that are worth studying further. I know that there's not one nice, neat explanation for all ghosts or paranormal activity. I know there's probably like multiple explanations that, can cover what we as people perceive or label as ghosts. Stuff like Annabelle, this will get kind of real metaphysical. um, you know, especially with Annabelle itself, the belief is that she's not necessarily haunted, but she is a vessel that some sort of entity has taken over, and it's kind of like
kind of a
hiding in it.
jumping point.
Yeah.
And I know you all mentioned the Warrens earlier. I respect the Warrens for their contributions to paranormal investigation, but I absolutely do not agree with about 99% of their ideology when it comes to it. To them, and this is fine, this was their perception. If it wasn't not paranormal, it was a demon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
There was no element of disproving. Honestly, from everything I've read and experienced over the time, and having the limited experience of like just studying the Warrens and their techniques and stuff like that, I have very rarely ever seen them disprove something. There's a lot of folks out there like that. That is not a discredit upon them alone. There is a lot of people out there that want to really, 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 really get that good evidence that something is there, but they're not really interested in making sure that there is no proof of that actually being in place.
In our last episode, we did the Devil Made Me Do It trial.
Okay.
And I'm curious to see what you guys think of that, because after doing a little bit of research, like at first I started as like a full true believer, and the more research I did, the more skeptical I became.
I think that was the way it kind of was with the Amityville situation and stuff like that. As you hear the story is so profound that it leaves an imprint upon you for the first time you get it. But then when you start to actually look at the history and the story itself, there's a lot of things that don't quite mesh. And then it's hard to maintain that level of that weirdly childish exaltation at the idea that this story, the way it was supposed to have happened, did happen. But then as you start chipping away at that, you start to lose a lot of that same oomph or pizzazz the story has. That's kind of the way it's been for me over the years, is just kind of looking at those things and seeing how that kind of changes. It's pretty often that I think when a lot of any kind of reputable investigation group or anybody that's a historical researcher wants to do to make sure that burden of proof's there, that's so critical. And that's also the hardest part of it.
It makes sense. I mean, also with the Warrens, like there's no money to be made in disproving any of these stories.
No. Their stories have become mainstream paranormal. Yeah. And you're never going to go away with them. And I'm not even going to say that everything they experienced wasn't true. I don't know. I wasn't put in a position to know. I can look at the way they conducted themselves for their investigative side, and I can make assertions off of that based off of my own experience. And I'm fair to do that. I can't cast disparaging on them because, like I said, I wasn't them. I wasn't able to be there when they were doing their investigations. And also, I'm not in a position to judge them because they were going by their time frame. Their time in history was different than ours now. We have a lot more equipment, a lot more things that are out there to possibly give us a better clue. Those folks had very limited for their time in the 60s and 70s. So it's not really, it's something that we have to keep in mind, we have to be aware of, but also I can't become a slave to the moment and understand that, look, their perceptions in the 60s and 70s were different than mine. So they may have legitimately experienced it, and it just looks different to me now because of my own cultural biases that are in place. That's the same thing we have to do as a historical researcher, especially when you're looking at any kind of primary source document or anything like that. Being able to pull out the evidence and not just the stories that have no kind of backing to it. To get that best evidence, then to kind of push that to mainstream. That's the hardest thing to do in historical research, and that's also the most important.
So I've got a question that kind of ties in with what we were talking about with how the Warrens were back then, and they were pretty religious, right? Mm-hmm. And you guys have mentioned that you guys are very historic. Do you think you guys had a religious upbringing which sort of put you this way towards the ghost hunting, or do you think religion doesn't really have much to do with the industry now, and it's more of histories, like skeptics?
There's so many complexities to that, Teresa. I'll let you start.
Oh, thanks.
You're welcome.
I never grew up in a religious household. I'm not religious now. And I think that kind of helps me in a way to stay objective. But when you're dealing with the paranormal, you can't completely cut religion out of it.
No.
Because so much of the historical background of what people believe ghosts are, directly ties in with their religious beliefs. When we are working with a client, we have to understand what their religious beliefs are and what those religious beliefs say about what they're experiencing, so we can kind of empathize with them, know what they're going through, and know how to best help them, even if it kind of goes against what we believe. um, you know, my religious beliefs about what a certain entity is have no bearing on the fact if we're dealing with a client who is absolutely convinced 100% without a doubt that they're dealing with something demonic. And so, we try to educate them as best as we can, try to give them some comfort in that, oh, well, okay, let's look at it this way, but then also work with their beliefs, network with other groups, with other, church officials from different religions if we have to make sure that our clients are comfortable and okay with what's going on. And the same can be said that if we're dealing with entities, not this past investigation at the old hospital on College Hill, but our first investigation, we had a ghost ask us to pray for it. And thank God we had somebody there who could, because I don't, I couldn't remember the entire Lord's Prayer if I had to. But, we have theories that we've come across that a lot of ghosts won't move on. They're stuck in a location because they're absolutely terrified of what's going to happen to them if they do move on. They're afraid that something they did in life is going to make certain that, they're going to hell and not heaven. And so they'd rather stay where they are. So for years, that was always the kind of mantra of scientific researchers: leave religion out of it, leave religion out of it. Well, realistically, you can't. I mean, you have to have an understanding, and you'd have to try to stay objective, but you absolutely have to have like a working understanding of religious beliefs.
I think that's fair, completely. It makes sense. I mean, just the whole spiritual aspect of it is completely understandable from a client's perspective.
Brian, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Oh, okay. I was waiting for something that wasn't there. So I personally am not what I would call a religious person either. Didn't really grow up in that kind of household. Never really put that much emphasis on it. I had parents and stuff that were involved a little bit here and there. Never really kind of imprinted itself on me for whatever. I'm not opposed to looking at it, because one of the things with science in general, the general consensus rule of science, is that nothing can be disproven. So we can't necessarily push anything aside. We have to be open-minded, like Teresa said, to anything or any possibility. And I mean, if you think about a situation like she was talking about, somebody that was in their lifetime extremely religious, extreme Southern Baptist or whatever like that, it's highly likely that if they feel like they've done something, they may not want to go to the other side because of what could happen. And also, it makes sense, because at least we know that that person would have possibly felt like that, according to what we know about who they were as a person and their religious beliefs. Because if you look at American history, one of the things that goes right along with the entire United States and everything that happened here was things like the Great Awakening, and where all these people got into all of that religious fervor and stuff like that. And there was a large portion of the population that was heavily religious, even up until the mid 1950s. And then you started seeing a gradual decline in overall church membership and all that stuff. So we have to be cognizant that these people lived in a different time, and therefore we have to be willing to at least understand that their worldview was different than ours, and that helps them make their lives the way it was. And that's how it was part of their existence. So therefore, if it was part of their existence, if by nature a lot of these hauntings are left behind, then that stuff is going to be probably left behind, at least to some degree, with these folks either. So we always have to be aware of that. And I'm one of those type in science that the unfortunate thing with science is that there is almost nothing we can prove with 100% certainty. On the flip side, we should never push things aside as not important, because just because they're not important to us with our cultural bias and who we are as a person does not reflect them at that time or this person in that event in their life. There's so many variables there that mathematically it would seem like completely improbable that that does not factor into at least some of these kind of situations, paranormal experiences and such.
So, would you guys ever end up collaborating with like a priest, a rabbi, or some other religious, or even would you end up collaborating with other ghost hunting teams?
Well, we have reached out a little bit, and then I'll let Teresa jump in as well. We've reached out to a lot of different groups around us. West Virginia Paranormal Investigations, based out of the northern part of the state. We have a fairly friendly relationship with the founders of it. We have relationships with other groups through different people that we know. And we had one lady from a different group that actually came with us to the investigation with the Ovnik and Beckley, and she's from another group. So we collaborate a decent amount with other groups, especially when these groups have similar profiles and similar kind of mission statements, I guess you could say, where all of us seem to be, or at least a lot of us seem to be trying to go in the same direction, although at different intervals, obviously. But we try to go in the same direction, and it makes good sense to try and collaborate because, like I said, we live in an extremely fractured and extremely skeptical climate towards what we are actually trying to look for. And there's no proof in it, period. So to work with other groups at least gives us a chance, at least if you would think about it logically, gives us a better chance if we are all working together to find something rather than just trying to go at it alone and then been heavily scrutinized because you're not willing to work with other people in the same field. I think that can be a part too as well.
Yeah, I agree. Peer review, networking is going to go even, it's more important in furthering this field than even creating, great new gadgets and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We need different perspectives. We need people from different backgrounds, people from different points of view, from even, different religious backgrounds, to compile our data and to take a look at all this data and try to make sense of it from, different ways. I'm absolutely not opposed to working with anybody who is willing to respectfully work with us. We don't want to go out with a bunch of, drunken frat boys or something that, are just, going to scream at ghosts and, not take it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, religious leaders, I would love to work with different religious leaders, not only to, get their perspective, but to make sure that we have somebody in case we do have a client that we need to refer them to. Even though we are a scientific based group, we work with psychics. We take their information just as we would any other data. We take it into consideration. We try to back it up, try to, double cross it to make sure that, it's being backed up by something else. And it's never the end to it all ends. It's just it's a piece of the puzzle that we're trying to put together.
Gotcha. What would you, so you'd mentioned you'd meet with anybody kind of like that's getting into it. What would you kind of suggest for someone that's just learning about paranormal investigation? Like maybe one of our listeners just listened and was like, oh my God, like I want to get into this. What are some suggestions that you guys have?
You want to start?
I'll let you start on this one.
Usually I tell people, like, don't go out and buy a bunch of equipment at first. Find either a reputable group or a pay to play. Just take some stuff that you would have around the house. Even your phone, although it doesn't have the best like recording abilities and can sometimes interfere with EMF readings and stuff. But if you don't have anything else, your phone can take pictures, video, voice recordings. There's a ton of apps that really scientifically they don't do a whole lot, but they're not any better or any worse than some of like the actual equipment that people spend hundreds of dollars to purchase. So there's a lot you can do with your phone, but just if you're really getting into it and really interested, don't buy a whole lot at first. Kind of find out what you're interested in. Find a mentor, find a group you can work with, or a local place. It's read everything you can find. Watch podcasts like this one. Watch different videos. Everybody's got a YouTube channel these days, and there's some really good content about paranormal investigation and equipment and stuff. And just don't ever take anything for granted, because like I said, I've been in this field for 20 years and it has changed so much even in those 20 years. Like back in, when I first started, people were like, oh my gosh, orbs, the orbs were ghosts. And it took several years before people finally realized, oh no, that's just your crappy digital camera that's causing these.
Dust.
And you'll see things like fluctuate and stuff, so never stop learning. And then Brian can fill in. There's so much information
it's almost like information overload these days, because now we've been doing this. I think Most Haunted came on sometime in the early 2000s, like 2001, 2001. Since that time, when Paranormal TV got out there have been so many different groups that have contributed any number of different things from any number of different perspectives. One of the things that I would tell anybody that wants to get involved is to reach out to groups that are established and try to just pick the brain of the folks that are there. A lot of folks have been doing this for a very long time and have a lot of different experiences and a lot of different things that they can give you tools and ideas to kind of go by. Same thing as Teresa, don't go out and buy thousands of dollars equipment the first thing, because realistically, there's unless you are one of a select few folks, you're not going to make any kind of money off this. So you don't want to go into debt doing something you love, because then it becomes something that you don't love. It becomes something that becomes more of a chore. And then that's negative in its own right, because that's taking something or somebody that was really interested in the field and kind of pushing them aside. So don't start out with expensive equipment. Make sure that you go into it with an open mind. Be able to stretch your boundaries a little bit and to think, maybe I need to think a little bit beyond my normal parameters to be able to understand what is happening, or what is happening to these people or our clients or what have you. Because you can go in with a combative attitude from the outright and the owner of the property or whatever is full of BS and they're just trying to sell you the story so they can get people in their business. You have to be willing to at least be able to go in there with a solid head and go in there. And if nothing else, you do your due diligence to do the best job that you can. And then let everything else be as it may. Those are the biggest things I would tell anybody. Don't buy expensive equipment. Open mind and reach out to folks. Get involved. Read, do stuff like that, because it's so critical to having any kind of concept of how to do this. And also, I would also mention looking up or trying to reach out and learn from groups that seem to be doing it the right way. You know when groups are trying to do this the right way and groups that are just either into it for the cheap scare or something nefarious. And you can see both of those happening very easily under circumstances, especially in the world we live in. Be willing to reach out and look for groups that don't just necessarily just look great to you on TV. Make sure you're learning about them. You're getting an idea of what they stand for. And then if they match how you feel, reach out to them, because most of us that do this on a day-to-day basis, we are going to be willing to work with you, and we will help you in whatever way we can. I've got two of my former students that have, one of them is a full-time member of SRI. He was a former student of mine when I taught many years ago. And he expressed interest in doing this one day. And I talked to him. I said, look, we're going to do this. You can join us on this. And we worked with him and gradually taught him how to use equipment and things like that. He's become more comfortable at it. So that's the same thing that can happen for a lot of folks, especially if you fall into the right group. You can learn a lot from these people that have been experienced, and it becomes something that you really, really enjoy. And I think it's something that he would attest today that he really, really enjoys doing. And it's just from having that interaction and that experience from working with folks like Teresa and I that got him to where he needs to be.
And we have another member, and how I met her was when she was a senior in high school. She reached out to me because she was doing her senior research project on paranormal investigation. So, I was her mentor and, kind of taught her some things, did some paperwork, and now, she's a valuable member of our team.
I think that's awesome. It kind of, I mean, this is a great transition to that. Where can people find you guys? I mean, in general, like your website, social media, if you guys want to promote any of that right now. And then, I mean, if people are in the area too, near you guys in West Virginia, any way to contact you, I guess social, whatever you think is best. What is it?
Okay, so we have a lot of different options. We have our website, which is http, all that, www.srihuntingtonwestvirginiawv.com. We've got that, and we keep relatively up to date. I haven't done a good job in the past couple weeks, but I got to get back on that. But we also have social media platforms. We've got Instagram. We have Facebook. We have a Facebook page that you can follow us, and we keep that updated fairly regularly as well. Teresa, you've got your blog, which I'll let you mention.
Yeah, you can find me at Teresa's Haunted History of the Tri-State. If you just search for that, you can find it. It's a blog. But I also am on Twitter, I'm on Instagram and Facebook. So people can reach out to me there. And, even if they're trying to get to SRI, I can either send them directly to Brian or I can field all questions for him. But
yeah, we welcome anybody to contact us. We've got phone numbers and all that on our websites and stuff like that. You can get directly to me. We've also got an email, srihuntingtonwv@gmail.com as well. So anybody that has any kind of queries or anything like that, they can send those that way as well. We try to reach out in as many different ways as we can, because part of it is our outreach in terms of networking with other groups. Part of it is outreach on getting with potential clients. And also it is, rather selfishly, I guess, I don't know, depending on your perspective, but it is to get our message and stuff like that out there as well, and to try to get more content that we can put together for the viewers and stuff like that to make our own contribution to this field.
Awesome. Great. Well, Colin, you got anything else to add?
I just wanted to say thank you guys. We were able to connect through a Facebook group, so that was really awesome. And again, I just want to say thank you for responding, and your stories have been great today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. It was awesome having you guys on. We appreciate it a lot.
Well, thank you guys for having us. We greatly appreciate it as well.
Yeah, thank you. Fun.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.
That's what you should know about paranormal investigators.